Did anybody have problems signing in today with using a password and stuff? I'm going to unmute you just to. Were you okay? Was that all right? You guys didn't have any problems signing in? Because I had an email from somebody from my 9 o'clock class that said they couldn't get in. I don't know if they. I think you have to use a passcode or password or something like that to sign on now. It's because those meetings were getting kind of a photobombed. All right, I might have to stop periodically. Again, you can unmute yourself if you need to. We'll pick up on doing some stuff with the brain here. Things are continuing the way they are with the current situation with the coronavirus. Just let somebody in here. And so, when you start hearing about, they're not necessarily people you might have known, but feel like I know, like John Prine, and not personally, but I knew of them. You hear about Boris Johnson from Britain ending up in intensive care. He seems to be out of intensive care now. And then you see these totally just staggering numbers. We're not coming back this semester. I have to let people into the meeting periodically. That's what I'm doing there. All right, so anyways, we're not coming back this semester. I would say summer school is almost certainly going to be online also. They haven't officially announced that, but that seems to be the direction it's going in. Don't quote me on that. It depends on your life situation. It might work out better. I would prefer if the school would announce sooner rather than later, because it's easier for me to make plans, my department to make plans, and for you to make plans. So, if you're thinking like, well, geez, summer is still going to have some significant, restraints, then maybe it would be a good time to, take a summer school class that will be online. You guys are doing this online already. You're going to have some skill set to bring to it. And that might simply, work out okay for you. But I think it'd be good to know well ahead of time. And I think that some of the major institutions, at least I've heard, like, if U of I in Champaign says there's no classes in person, that this is all going to be, a virtual. I think that really is quite telling. All right. So anyways, we'll get started. We'll do some of this stuff here. We'll get through what we can. I'm trying to look for a balance of material. Like I said, I'm going to split this stuff from chapters 13 through, let me see what we have here, 13 through 16. So we have 13, 14, 15, 16, 4 chapters, and we're going to split that pretty much in half. And I'll do that too. I don't think I sent it with the announcements. I think they still need to give you a few more.
Sorry, I can't hear anything.
But you will get, you will get credit for that, for doing that. But I want to have it sort of compartmentalized. Trying to keep track of all this stuff on a computer is not as easy as you think. So I've got, these 3 classes. I've got lectures, labs. I'm trying to find online video stuff for you to watch and keep up with, like the tape on the brain. Hopefully that's working for you. All right, so we'll pick up on page 519. Let me just, and in this chapter. So 519, if you have a different book, what we're looking at is right here with the cerebellum. It's cerebellum, cerebellum. So, the cerebrum, we say right and left cerebral hemispheres. Typically, the cerebrum is the right plus the left cerebral hemispheres. So that's like the upper part of the brain here. So we're going deeper into the brain, right? And the cerebellum is actually going to be posterior, inferior. So if you remember when we were doing those bones, you've got, frontal, paired parietal, occipital, and going to the back, you can feel a bony prominence right here. And that represents kind of like the posterior, inferior part of the brain. It's on the back right here. And that's the area where this cerebellum is. So it's just behind the midbrain. So you have midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, fourth ventricle. Just behind that is the cerebellum. So anyways, find this in whatever book you have or edition. They're going to have something very much like this. And you can have these points here on the side. And these points on the side are actually like points 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the cerebellum, what it does is it allows for smooth coordinated movements of the body. So picture it without the cerebellum. So everybody has seen this, even though you didn't know what you were looking at. So they used it, for example, in Jurassic Park. If you remember the way the velociraptors moved, they were the smaller ones. They often had this kind of jerking motion like this. And if you didn't see that, everybody has seen, chickens in the barnyard or pigeons in the city somewhere, often by the, L tracks or something like that, underpasses, that type of thing. And so you see the way the chickens or the pigeons move around when they walk. They have that weird head bobbing motion, right? It's not as smooth and coordinated because they don't have the cerebellum that gives that kind of smooth coordinated movement. And if somebody has an injury to the cerebellum, they often have this kind of, a movement to them that is, it's obvious to anybody. You don't need any special training to know there's something wrong with the nervous system or the musculature. Usually you could tell that looks more nervous than musculature, right? They give it, by the way, on 518 in the bottom left, effects of alcohol and drugs on the cerebellum, disturbance of gait, rarely walks in a straight line, sways and staggers, temporary cerebellar disturbance, loss of balance and posture, inability for proprioceptive. So that's that old thing, for they close your eyes, touch your finger to the nose sort of stuff, walk in a straight line, one foot in front of the other. Those are actually pretty good. Those are things, especially today with the video cameras that police officers wear on their things, that and even before when they didn't, they just record it in their notes. That is admissible in courts of law typically. I mean, it's a pretty good indicator of a person's lack of coordination. They shouldn't be behind the wheel, that type of stuff. All right, so I'm going to just read these points off. I don't expect you to be able to write them down. Let me let a couple people in here. I don't expect you to write these things down, but what does the cerebellum do then? And I'll give you a good overview at the end. So for voluntary movements, the primary motor cortex in the forebrain, so that's the higher part of your brain, sends the impulses to the cerebellum. So from way up here, primary motor cortex, right and left side for, which is for the motor control of the opposite side of the body. So the information goes to the cerebellum. Proprioceptors. So proprioceptors are sensory things. They tell you about what's going on in joints, ligaments, and tendons in areas of the body. So you could close your eyes and have your hand up here or over here. You don't have to see it. You know where it's at because of information from your proprioceptors. So information comes from proprioceptors to the cerebellum. It's going to compare the planned movements of the brain with the body's actual movements based on that, proprioceptive information, and sends impulses for appropriate correction. So cerebellum gives smooth coordinated movements. There's a nice summary of this somewhere. I'll have to see if I can find it, but basically it's this. The cerebellum compares the higher brain's intention with the body's actual performance and initiates the appropriate corrective measures. So it makes things look smooth, natural, and easy. So for example, sometimes you see, like those figure skaters in the Olympics, which, who knows when there's going to be another Olympics, or you see one of these great basketball players, whether it was Jordan or Stephen Curry or whoever, and they're sinking these 3-point shots from way out there, and it looks easy. The baseball pitcher throwing the curveball, the batter hitting. they've done it so many thousands and thousands and thousands of times. They've taken off all the rough spots so it looks easier. You may have seen like a movie or a TV show, and they have an actor, and all of a sudden they're gonna act like they're playing tennis, or they're a good basketball player, or a good baseball pitcher, or something like that. And you look at it for about 10 seconds, and you know they never really did this before in their life. So if you want to know what the difference is, what it's like, if you're right-handed, right, try playing catch with somebody with the baseball and the glove, but now you're throwing with your left hand. Believe me, that transition is not an easy one. So the other use for it is this. Like some years ago, I had a niece, and she wanted to learn to play, I don't know what it was, the flute or some type of instrument like this. And so you could buy it anywhere pretty inexpensively. And I went online, and the number one thing that they said, do not try to learn this on your own. Take lessons from someone who knows what they're doing. And the reason why is they did not want to ingrain or imprint on the brain the incorrect way of doing it. The problem with that is then you have to unlearn, which is almost impossible, what you put into your brain and learn it correctly, right? So I coached high school basketball, girls high school basketball for, about 9 years, almost a decade over at Seton Academy before it closed. And this is true of a lot of the coaches. It did not want kids really shooting a three-point shot in junior high school because they're not physically strong enough to do it correctly. Yes, they could take the ball, they could launch it in the direction of the basket, and some of them are going to drop in, but they could drop kick them, and some of them would go in. That's not the criteria. The thing is, they were learning to do it improperly. So when they got big enough and strong enough to really do the correct form, right, they had already learned how to do it incorrectly, and it's very difficult to undo that. Even though we're not doing a physical type of thing, that's why with a lot of chapters, when we had our normal sort of setup, I wanted you to hear it in lecture first, so you get it in your mind correctly, and you don't go off any tangents, right? It's also why, if you learned how to ride a bike as a kid, or let's say you played a lot of pool, you played a lot of ping pong, or tennis, basketball, or whatever, and let's say it's been a decade since you've been on a bike, how long is it going to take you to be able to ride a bike again, or to shoot a good game of pool, or to shoot some good free throws in basketball, or throw a baseball? It's not going to take you but a couple minutes at most. Why? It's in your cerebellum. So when they talk about muscle memory for doing things really well over, it's not in the muscles, it's largely in the cerebellum. It gets imprinted in there, if you will, how to do it properly. And that's what kids are doing when they're developing fine motor skills and that type of stuff. All right, so that's on, that really goes, that whole section goes from 517 to 519. Yeah, so 518, about the middle left, that's a good summary of what I was trying to say. So you don't have to write notes on it. The cerebellum does not initiate skeletal muscle movement. It coordinates and fine-tunes skeletal muscle movements that were initiated by the cerebrum, ensures the skeletal muscle contraction follows the correct pattern, leading to smooth, coordinated movements. And it stores memories of previously learned movement patterns. But again, the problem is, you never want to learn it incorrectly, because then trying to undo that is really a nightmare. And the same thing, playing the piano, playing the guitar, all that type of stuff. That's why you see piano players, they're doing the scales and that type of stuff. They're imprinting proper things into their brain. All right, limbic formation on page 519. Don't get into all the detail of that. I want to mention the limbic system is the heart and center of our emotions. And look, the reality here is we're dealing with a lot of stress. Every one of us, I am, you are, you're concerned with yourself, you're concerned with your family. There could be concerns about finances. I know I've seen stuff on the news um, of cars backed up for a mile going to a facility that's dispensing food because so many workers are paycheck to paycheck and they've lost their jobs. I have a neighbor that works at Together We Cope, which is out here in Tinley Park. He said starting right after the quarantine in place, every day they were seeing an additional 20 or 25 more people or families showing up just, for food, which comes from, I think, the Greater Chicago Depository or Food Bank or whatever that's called. So a lot of us are under, a lot of stress from different sources. How things are going to sort themselves out. By the way, in regards to that, this is just an aside. Probably, in case I run out of time at the end, probably we're not going to be back to school this semester. I think that's for sure. And summer school, they have not announced this, is very likely to be online. So think about that for yourself. If you have more time, be thinking about, can you fit in, and you already be skilled at it, taking it online. I think I mentioned that previously. But anyways, our limbic system, there is a center, like an emotional system in our brain, and there is an actual circuitry to it. So if you've ever had this experience where under a period of stress, it's like you can't get something off your mind. It feels like it keeps rolling and rolling around and around and around in your brain. And that is what's happening. There's actual electrical circuitry about emotional responses to stress and things that are in your mind that make it very difficult to get it, to get off that and to get on to other things. So there are things that can be helpful with that. All that kind of stuff that source, I always thought I was kind of dismissive of it. It all sounded like, all this new agey, kind of thing of, write a gratitude journal. And I was very skeptical about that. And we had a presenter this past semester, or maybe it was, I don't know if it was might have been in August. But anyways, this guy was citing, and I went into it prepared to be very skeptical, but he came in there very well prepared and citing very good academic studies from like Harvard University, Harvard Medical School on the real benefit to the brain of gratitude and gratitude journaling and how it helped in everyday life, but also individuals who are dealing with PTSD, soldiers coming back from war, dealing with traumatic brain injuries, the trauma that they had experienced, and that type of stuff. So there really is something to that. There really are resources out there, and no one was more skeptical than me. I wanted to see actual evidence. They said, well, we can show you with MRIs and CAT scans and PET scans, which are positron emission tomography and stuff, that this stuff really does work, as well as anecdotal evidence. All right, so anyways, that is the limbic system. It's the heart of our emotional system. And it is kind of complex, but that's on page 519. Sometimes referred to as the emotional brain. It forms a ring or border around the brain stem, lower brain area. And that ring is how that stuff goes around and around in your brain. All right, on page, actually on page 520, we'll come back to this later for olfactory. Our sense of smell is tied into our emotional brain. You know what, before I forget, I want to take a fast picture of who's in here, because the last class, some people signed out before I got a photo to document it. And then if it looks like somebody comes in after that, I'll just take the picture again and update it. All right, so the reticular formation, we don't have a lot of time to discuss, the particulars, but I'll just give you the basics of it. right? If you remember, all the way going back to reticular fibers, we talked about reticular. It means like a mesh-like network through something, and this is a reticular. It's a mesh-like network through your brain, and it involves what's called the reticular activating system, RAS. So here's what it does. You go to sleep at night, at some point you wake up in the morning, but it's because the reticular activating system has brought your brain to a state of awakeness, alertness, of consciousness. So the flip side is, what if something happened to the reticular activating system of an individual from a head trauma, from, let's say it got impinged in by a tumor, or there was an abscess, an infection there, and it failed to do its job? The person would not come to a state of awakeness, alertness, or consciousness. Even with the higher cortex intact, functioning properly, as shown by EKGs and all sorts of other tests. All right, so if you've ever seen one of those movies or you've heard those stories, and you'll hear about them periodically, about somebody is in a coma for days, weeks, months, years, even decades, and they come out of it, you're like, what happened here? The injury was almost certainly to the reticular activating system, and then however it was, it repaired itself. Remember, we said, like, if you cut a nerve, the nerve cell might survive, but the axon was destroyed and it could heal itself at a slow rate. Somehow that system healed itself, and now the person's awake and alert. This is not the Terry Schiavo case where she had a heart attack, lack of blood flow to the brain. They resuscitated her. The brain stem survived, but all the higher cortex was gone. The cortex was gone. The EEGs, I've said EKG before I meant EEG. The EEG showed that. CAT scans, MRIs, PET scans, there's all sorts of things, blood flow studies. They all said the cerebral cortex was gone. She was never going to come out of it like these individuals came out of their coma. Those individuals, the higher cortex was still functioning. And they've interviewed and they said, well, what was it like? And they said, well, it's like that experience when you're really tired, you fall asleep on the couch, and you're vaguely aware of people in the room talking, in and out of the room, the radio, the TV, but you just couldn't wake up or didn't wake up. So often when they say, like, well, the person just came out of surgery or they've had a head injury or whatever's going on, and they're kind of out of it, and they say, well, can this person hear when we're talking to them? They go, well, we don't really know. There's no harm. Go ahead and talk to them. And actually, you should assume that they can hear you. We'll talk later about hearing. Hearing is like, when you're coming out, when you're becoming awake or coming out of general anesthesia or that type of thing, hearing is usually the first sense to be restored. And that can cause, some issues. Actually, it does kind of fit here. Maybe I'll just tell a story here. Hearing comes back first. So when you're dealing with patients and they are totally out of it and unresponsive, they're on the operating table, they're in recovery, they're in their bed, and they're just out of it. We're fighting human nature. There's a human tendency to assume that they are out of it, that they're, you see nursing, I don't want to pick on nurses, you see medical people or staff people or maintenance people or, those who do, clean up and stuff like that, almost start treating the patient like they're part of the furniture. But you have to assume that they can actually hear you. There have been many cases of real embarrassment and very public lawsuits. There was one a couple of years ago down in Houston. This woman was, I don't know the ins and outs, but basically the medical people. She needed some type of surgery. I don't know if it was elective or I don't know what the deal was. I don't know if there's a problem with insurance, with finance. And she was very aggressive. And they didn't, it seemed like they just didn't like this woman. And they figured they treated her like she was a big pain. And she was in the operating room and being put under. And then, you come out there and they go, they bring you to post-op and so on. So anyway, somewhere in the midst of all this stuff, the physicians and nurses and the staff workers there were saying really unpleasant things about this woman and how they felt about her. And because they figured she was just out of it. And afterwards, she was able to recite chapter and verse what they said about her because she wasn't as out as she thought. She was physically unresponsive, but her hearing, again, the first sense to return, she heard it all as she was being put under. She heard it all as she was coming out afterwards. Again, she was able to recite a chapter and verse, and she went out and got a lawyer and brought him to court and made it very public, and they had to publicly apologize to her, and it was an embarrassment to the workers in the hospital, and I'm sure there was a financial suit associated with it. So, a patient can be totally out of it in that bed, unresponsive, nothing going on. Never say anything around a patient like that you would not say if they're awake and alert and they were sitting right there. Never say anything you would not want to have recited back, and maybe recited back in a court of law. I know, it's human nature. You just have to check yourself. Sometimes it's as hard as, make yourself stop touching your face and stuff like that. It's not that easy, but believe me, you are better off. Keep those thoughts and opinions to yourself. You never know who's hearing you. You always assume someone is listening to what you are saying, not to mention the acoustics of where you're at. Right? So that ties in a bit to the reticular formation, the reticular activating system. Related to that also, this is a little bit of a change, but there's something called SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, and it relates to a number of things. So sudden infant death syndrome, it's rare, but it happens. An otherwise healthy young baby is found in the crib, and they've not made it. They've succumbed to something, and they can't figure out why. I'm kind of running out of time here, so let's finish up this, allow time to answer, for you to ask questions. So one of the things that was let me go back a minute. This is why they have babies in modern cribs. Don't buy an old crib from a garage sale that might be unsafe. Don't buy car seats that might be unsafe. Don't buy even those things, the reclining things that babies are in, that they're like 45 degrees, they recommend, that are old, because sometimes the kid puts their head like this and now they can't breathe. Get modern, approved, safe things, and there's ways that they have kids in bed without the stuffed animals, without the blankets, so that they have airflow is good and that type of stuff. Anyways, years ago, it was thought that SIDS ran in families because just some doctor who wasn't an expert, just a general practitioner, said he thought it was the true. And then some physician years or decades later says, how do we know that's true? And did a study, and it turns out SIDS does not run in families. So they went back and they looked at some examples where one baby after another, extremely, extremely rare, but one baby after another seemed to have died from SIDS in the family. And what they found out was those babies had not just died of SIDS, that actually the mom had, I think it was called like Munchausen by proxy, where the mom was mentally ill and she was getting all of this, oh my God, look what's happened to you, weird sort of attention, sympathy, and feedback that she sought out with. And actually those babies had been killed. But anyway, it's very rare. But one of the things, this is an idea, and I'm not sure how well it's held up, but you can see how it can make sense, is that some physicians for a while were advocating not having an absolutely quiet environment for the baby. Instead, have some background noise, some noise going around, because their idea was, and I'm not sure how well it's held up, but it makes sense, there's some mild stimulatory input through hearing into the brain to the reticular activating system to keep the brain alert enough. I mean, the baby would sleep, but enough alertness not to go into such a deep sleep that perhaps the respiratory center doesn't tell them to take their next breath. All right, we don't have time. There's a very interesting area on 521. This is on fainting or syncope, coma, and persistent vegetative state, and so on. The EEGs, we don't really have time to do that. There's a nice thing on memory and learning on page 523 at the bottom. You can just, that's just for your own interest. It's not on the test, but short-term versus long-term memory. Short-term memory is why this, when you, I think we mentioned this before, you go to buy a car, the sales guy is going to use your name, or sales, woman, whoever it is, like half a dozen times in the first 30 seconds or minutes, to the point it's annoying, because they're trying to get your name in their brain from short-term to long-term memory, because they're trying to create a connection, and it's embarrassing, and it's a distancing if they have to ask you for your name again. And you've had that happen at parties. You get introduced to somebody, 30 seconds later, you forget their name, and you ask again, and a minute later, you forgot again. It's just in short-term memory. And then long-term memory is real changes in the brain. So it happens in tests too. You come in to take a test, and you come to take the test, and you're like, you don't want to talk to anybody. You don't want anybody asking you a question. You don't want anybody interact with anybody, because your grasp of the knowledge is in short-term memory. It's like a house of cards. It's all going to come down. If you talk to somebody, you get distracted. You just want to go in, take the test, and get out. It's in short-term memory. Long-term memory is for more long-term storage. So where it's relevant to is this: think about your Alzheimer's patient, your dementia, that type of stuff. It's often called the long goodbye. You may have had this experience where the person can't remember what they had for lunch, what they did yesterday, and all that type of stuff, but they can tell you chapter and verse, recite chapter and verse, great details of what happened decades ago. But they forgot that, their spouse died 2 years ago, or things like this. Those individuals, if you don't really know them, they're often masterful at hiding what's taking place. So early dementia and Alzheimer's are often difficult for people outside of the family, or more distant members of the family, not in the immediate household or in the medical community, to figure out, unless there's very specific testing, because they're great at hiding it. They stick to stories they know. They're personable. They can hold up for about 30 minutes to maybe 40 minutes, and then after that, it falls apart. And again, if you didn't know them, they could be talking about somebody, you don't know them, but the person who does, hey, that person died years ago. And it's very, there's stuff about them, like you don't tell them repeatedly, somebody, so-and-so died, you already know that. You have to tell them, the lies about it to make their life bearable. Otherwise, it's like they've heard it for the first time. So you say, hey, maybe you'll see them again sometime. They're not here, maybe later, that kind of stuff. All right. So it's a very painful thing with Alzheimer's. Actually, and they use the term the long goodbye is on page 524 at the top. And there is sort of an early onset Alzheimer's too. It's a very tough, tragic thing. And we see the tragedy of it today with individuals in long-term care facilities or nursing homes. And I know a lot of my students between my classes work in those facilities. But now, I mean, talk about being alone, really can't visit. There's such a high risk with this coronavirus. So we all have a lot to deal with. So make sure you find resources for yourself if you have things going on. So anyways, I want to open it up to questions here. We still have a fair amount of material to go, so we won't have a lecture test or anything in our near future. I'll always give you at least a few days notice. But I'm going to unmute you. So any questions or problems, difficulties, challenges that you're facing, getting on and stuff? Anybody? You're able to manage okay with getting online, keeping up with the, uh, the outline are basically notes in the chapters. You're okay with that? I did adjust some of the grades. I didn't realize for grades that it was already posting things on there, but those were just raw scores. I always go through things. So I read grading there. I'm gonna have to do some math at the end. I think we're okay with things so far. I know some people sent me emails. I responded to them. Later on this afternoon, if you sent me an email about an issue, I will be able to try to look into it for you. But I've been Zoom meetings. This is my third one this morning. So it's quite a busy time. Anything else?
Is there a way you can email us back about the essay question? Because I saw my grade, I wasn't pleased. So is there a way you can kind of like email me back and kind of explain like the process?
Well, send me an email and say, could you look at my essay test again or something like that, and I'll look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Email. Also, I do reply in emails. If you're not getting it back, like if they keep coming back as undeliverable, and I'm not sure why. So sometimes you might even get multiple copies. It's not that, it's that if it comes through on EDU versus on Moodle, which is an LMS system, they might or might not be, and there's two different things on Moodle. So I'm trying to get send some things back to you. But yeah, go ahead and email me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else about that? All right. Then, take care of yourselves, take care of your families. This is going to be more of a marathon than a sprint. So settle in. We're going to be doing this, and I don't mean just us in particular, but this general learning for quite a while in the near future. So we're all going to have to adapt to it. And there's quite a learning curve for me also. All right. So we will see you. We're going to do the same thing on Wednesday. So take care, keep up with things, and we'll see you then. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.